Reconvene, and we're going to let Elma Stansel, if you'll come up here. I'm going to let him talk about the Department of Economic Development and Tourism, and you can really applaud this group for the phenomenal growth in the number of people that we have put back to work, new jobs in the state of Georgia. Edwin, you want to just tell them a little bit about yourself, and then take a few minutes and just talk about in general what y'all do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this opportunity. My name is Elmer Stansel. I represent the Georgia Department of Economic Development in our Legislative Affairs and Policy Division. I've been with the department going on 9 years. And my role at the department is to identify policies that help grow the state's economy and grow jobs and investment. And a lot of that revolves around tax policy for businesses. But as I'll explain in a little bit, we're at the Georgia Department of Economic Development. We're a little bit more about a collaborative approach to economic development and growing jobs and investment. At the department, we have several divisions, and global commerce is our cornerstone of the department, and that's our traditional business recruitment and business retention arm of the department, and we go out and recruit companies to come to Georgia. But the main source of the way that we grow jobs is through our existing industry. Over 65% of the job totals that we tout every year come from the expansion of existing industry. So we're very focused on those efforts in Georgia. We do that through a regional network of individuals who help establish relationships with existing companies within the state, within their region. We have 12 individuals that are divided up, and they have about 10 or 12 counties each, and they represent different areas of the state. And different areas of the state have different needs and different business needs, different workforce needs. So that's kind of the way that we do it with existing industry. With new industry, our team at the department is segmented into different market segments. We have teams that work on anything from energy to advanced manufacturing to aerospace and auto manufacturing, and a different array of energy, different array of segments that they have expertise in, that they go out and market Georgia as a destination for these types of companies and establish contacts and relationships within those industries. So that's kind of our global commerce team, and that's how we go about growing jobs and investment through new companies and helping existing companies grow. We also have a trade division. So we have individuals that are based in Atlanta that work throughout the state to help existing Georgia companies grow their business through trade, and they establish contacts with companies and help them export the product that they make here in Georgia to markets outside the United States. And the way that they do that is through a network of our international offices. We have 11 international offices, actually 12 international offices in 11 different countries. We have an office presence in Canada, Mexico. We're the first state to have a presence in Colombia. We have an office in Brazil, Chile. Going over to Asia, we have an office in Japan, China, Korea. We have an office in Israel. And in Europe, we have offices in the UK as well as Munich, which covers continental Europe. So we use those offices to help establish trade contacts for Georgia companies. Now, the companies that the trade division assists are normally companies that an overwhelming majority of those companies are less than 100 employees, and they're traditionally employers that are manufacturers that employ less than 100 employees. And if you think about it, really that's the size company that really doesn't have the resources to employ someone to go out and expand their market through trade. So that's why we assist them. We find ourselves assisting that size company. So it's a great benefit that we offer to our small manufacturers and small businesses. So that's the trade division. In those international offices that I mentioned, their job is twofold. So they help with the trade component of connecting Georgia companies, helping connect Georgia companies that are exporting to those markets. Those offices also establish contacts within those countries to see if there are companies that are looking to expand to North America. And if they are looking to expand to North America, we want to make sure that Georgia is on their radar. Moving on to another division of the department, the workforce division. This is the newest division of our department. It was formerly the Governor's Office of Workforce Development. It's now the Georgia Department of Economic Development Workforce Division. This is basically the administration of the federal funds that come down from D.C. Of the Workforce Investment Act money that comes down from Washington. Last year we administered about $73 million in federal funds that flow through our department to local workforce investment boards that help and assist with training programs and retraining programs for those that are underemployed and unemployed. I know that Alabama probably has a similar network within their state to administer those Workforce Investment Act funds. So that's the newest division of our department. We also have the tourism division. We market the state as a tourism destination and grow jobs and investment in the state through that function. We have, again, as we have regional people in the global commerce side of our shop, we also have regional people in the tourism side, and they help communities. They work with the local convention and visitors bureaus and local communities to help establish what we call tourism product, or places to come and see within their community, and they help communities identify those assets that they have, and we as a state help promote the state as a destination, and also help communities promote the assets that they have as tourism and tourist destinations. Moving on to another division within our department, the film industry, which you'll hear Lee Thomas, who's the Deputy Commissioner of Film, talk extensively about our film office and our film market here in Georgia. We've been extremely blessed with a tremendous growth in a very, very difficult economic times in the last 8 years in the film industry, and that's in large part and thanks to our General Assembly, who passed an incentive that helped kickstart that industry. But Lee will go into a lot of detail about what that industry looks like in Georgia, and some of the things that we've benefited from that industry. The last division I'll talk about at the department, and then I'd be glad to take any questions not film related, because Lee can answer those. But the last division in our department is the Georgia Council for the Arts. And again, when Governor Deal was elected in 2011, he wanted to include and incorporate the arts within economic development, and we've seen tremendous benefits from including the arts in our efforts to recruit business, and also their connections in tourism, and also in film and music. So the Georgia Council for the Arts is based on community development through the arts education, and economic development, and we're very, very happy that integration has worked so well with the Georgia Department of Economic Development. So that's kind of a high-level overview of how we're structured at the Department of Economic Development. We have like I said, an integrated approach. The governor when he decided to bring some other divisions like the Georgia Council for the Arts and the Workforce Division within our department, he said, we want to create jobs and investment in Georgia. It doesn't matter how we do it, and it doesn't matter what those jobs are. We just want to create opportunities for Georgians, jobs and opportunities for Georgians. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to.
No, thank you. On such short notice, that's why you're where you are today, is because of your expertise and your ability to just come right in and you know so much about the department, and we appreciate the commissioner. Chris has just done a phenomenal job, and please tell him thank you for all that he's done. Do we have any questions from the committee to Elma here? You're 16. You wish.
You're right, I wish. Mr. Stansel, thanks again for your great service as one of our state employees, and you, as the chairman noted, you are expertise in this field. We also have an office in Los Angeles that is shared by the ports guy. And isn't that a little bit of a recruitment thing, too, from all those
Absolutely.
Businesses on the left coast that are overtaxed and just needs to come to the southeastern United States?
Absolutely. We, several years ago, we established, along with the Georgia Ports, an office in California to help recruit some of the shipping companies that were using the California, or actually the Pacific ports of call, talking with those shipping companies and convincing them that the East Coast and in particular Savannah Port and Brunswick Port were better opportunities for their companies. So provided an opportunity for us to recruit them through their efforts to get more shipment, more ports of call to the Savannah and Brunswick ports. And that person also talked with companies to see if there were opportunities to locate or expand their operations in the state, in Georgia.
Mr. Chairman, I found that fascinating because many states have this. In fact, I was in Germany one time, man, in a department booth at the Messe, it's called, in Hanover, and so was Dothan, Alabama, of all places. Dothan, Alabama had their own... I'm not sure the state of Alabama was there, but Dothan, Alabama was there in their own booth. And this was the largest industrial show in the world at the time, and I thought that was interesting. And also, Texas not only does what we do, and y'all do, but they do have an office in California just to recruit California companies to Texas because of their extreme taxation.
Alabama's Mobile has really been moving forward on that, and we always enjoy going down to Mobile during the Southern Legislative Conferences and everything. Are there any other questions? Yes, Senator.
One thing you mentioned, and I believe you said that your workforce development had just been moved into your department. We always consider that, as we recruit industry, that's one of the linchpins that really makes a difference. And we're restructuring ours somewhat. We're restructuring ours into our 2-year college program, putting our workforce development and putting more demands on them. Tell us kind of under your scenario what you've done since you've gotten workforce development. How does it get down to actually training the worker out in the field for the industry?
Well, the training programs and the money that comes down from the federal government is administered by the local Workforce Investment Board. So that's a local function of the specific training that they offer within their service delivery region. Some of the things that we've benefited from moving the workforce division from an independent office of the governor to under our division is that they're involved in a lot of the projects that we work. When we have prospective companies that are coming here and looking in different regions of the state, we can look to workforce to identify maybe some of the local workforce training money that might be available for an industry that may move into that particular region. So that's been one of the benefits. Also, the governor has aligned, and Lee will talk about this with the High Demand Career Initiative. The governor has aligned a few different course studies allowed a few different course studies to be tuition-free in our technical college system. And Lee will talk about what kind of benefit that we've seen from that in the film industry. So.
Thank you so much. I'm going to call on our co-chair here, Senator Harbison, to introduce Lee. And Lee, you just give us all goosebumps.
Thank you.
Oh, that's it.
Sony movie, yeah.
Well, Lee Thomas is the Deputy Commissioner for Film, Music, and Digital Entertainment at the Georgia Department of Economic Development. After completing her academic studies, Lee returned to Atlanta in 1996 to work for the Georgia Film and Videotape Office as a project manager, and then became a location specialist for the office in 1998. After finding locations for film and television projects for 12 years, Lee became director of the film division in 2010, and then was promoted to director of film, music, and digital entertainment in 2011. Films that Lee has worked on has included The Hunger Games, Catching Fire, The Blind Side, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, Footloose, Fast Five, The Conspirator, and Zombieland. And she promised me that she's going to work on my new movie called Getting Butter from a Duck with Ed Harbison. So, how you doing, Lee?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thanks for Elmer for stepping in here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the film industry as a whole. I don't know how much y'all are familiar with how things have changed over the years, but I've been at the Georgia Department of Economic Development, which was then called Industry, Trade, and Tourism, for 19 years now. So it's been a whirlwind trip, but it's changed a lot. We spent a tremendous amount of time in the old days trying to find exactly the right locations for movies. And we would go out with a 35 millimeter camera and 35 millimeter film and go to Wolf Photo and all that kind of stuff and try to find locations for them. That has changed. In the late 1990s, Canada started very aggressive tax incentives in order to take the U.S. business away, and they were very successful with doing that. One of our biggest businesses at the time was Movies of the Week, and we virtually lost all of them. We saw a lot of companies shut down here. We saw a lot of our crew move away. So after 1998, in 2003, Louisiana started a very aggressive domestic incentive. And we had been scouting for a long time with the Ray Charles story. Ray Charles is a Georgia native. They had already had offices set up here. And so Louisiana started their incentive, and they picked up and left. So that was a real wake-up call to a lot of the legislators here today that said, we've got to do something about this. So what was once a definitely a location-driven industry is now incentive-driven. Now, a director or producer can't just say, I want to go to X. It comes from the studio accounting departments, and those people determine the places where their money's going to go the furthest, and they say, these are your choices. So in 2000, first we passed one in 2005, and it was a little convoluted. We had to kind of figure everything out. It was hard for producers to budget with. So in 2008, we really got it right. That's when we passed the House Bill 2008 Georgia Industry Investment Act. It is a tax credit program. It requires a $500,000 minimum spend. If you're doing commercials, you can aggregate that spend over the course of the year. And if you've seen that big Georgia logo that comes up in the enroll credits, you'll know that it requires for the 10% uplift to get to 30%. You have to put a Georgia logo in the enroll credits, or you have to do something else with equal promotional value for the state. Well, they can do a number of things. We have this website, Come Tour Georgia. They can do behind-the-scenes videos that show how much they love Georgia. We have these things where Susan Lucci talks about, I love this restaurant and I love going here and everything. And then we put those on our website. And that would be like 1 point. We make them get 5 points. So our incentive is a credit, not a rebate. It's transferable to anybody with income tax liability in the state. And recently, in the last couple of years, the Georgia Department of Revenue now instituted a voluntary audit program. And so these companies can pay the Department of Revenue to go ahead and do an audit, and that indemnifies them from a recapture. Before, it's like they would file their tax return, and then there was a 3-year look-back period. if the Department of Revenue did an audit on them and recaptured some of the money, that would come back from the person they sold it to. So what has happened as a result of instituting this voluntary audit program is the sale of our tax credits has gone up from the low to mid 80s to over 90 cents on the dollar. We're here and there like 91, 92 cents on the dollar. So it's really like getting an even better incentive. This is just a quick look to show you kind of how volatile the tax incentive market has been this year. This is something Disney provided to us. But you see all the pink states. Those are states that have made changes in 2015. You see Georgia is red. That's a transferable tax credit. Alabama is white, which is a refundable tax credit. So we here in Georgia, we don't give money back. They only get tax credits. They have to sell them to somebody with income tax liability. We don't cut them a check like some states. So the economic impact, 2015, we had 244 projects last year, and that was a combination of feature films, independent films, television series, and commercials. The direct spend of $1.7 billion with an economic impact of $6 billion. If you look at, our office started in 1973. From 1973 all the way to 1998, we only did $2.5 billion. So we certainly more than doubled it last year. Here's what has happened, again, just visually you can see what has happened since 2007. At 2007 we were at $244 million of economic impact. By 2015 we were at $6 billion. There's a number of reasons why Georgia has been an ideal fit for this industry. Not only do we have a great tax credit, but we do have infrastructure here. A lot of people were already working in the business here, so we do have a lot of equipment suppliers. We have a deep crew base. It's not what we'd like it to be, but we do have a deep crew base, which means they save money by not having to bring people in. We have a temperate climate here. One of our big competitors for a while was Michigan, but they're only going to shoot there about half the year. And then if they miss their window, we'd get a scrambled call where they were wanting to come to Georgia. We have diverse shooting locations, and we have the mountains. We have a major metropolitan city. We have the coast. And we have Hartsfield-Jackson, which is a huge deal. 26 flights a day, direct flights a day to Los Angeles. Whenever they need to get somebody to or fro or something in and out, it's very easy for them. This is a community spend report, which we require when a show wraps. And this just gives you an idea of what they spend the money on. This is the movie 42, the Jackie Robinson story. You can see lodging, room days, 9,449 room days. They spent $187,000 on car rental, $410,000 on catering, on dry cleaning, $89,000. You can see at the bottom, their cast and extras, their crew people, 5,956 crew people altogether. It's a lot of business, and it spreads throughout the economy. Absolutely. I mean, it really is. It's over 5,000 businesses, I think, annually that the MPAA companies alone, and that's only 6 companies, spends money on. As a result of the tax incentive, we have seen a tremendous amount of infrastructure growth. We've had a lot of stages be built in the state of Georgia. A lot of companies have moved here. What you see at the top right there is Pinewood, the UK company. It's a worldwide company. It's where they do, Harry Potter movies and Snow White and the Huntsman and all the James Bond movies. Now they're in Georgia. This is the first U.S. location. They now have almost 1,000 acres in Fayetteville, Georgia. They have built 12 sound stages, and they're building 31 at completion. So all of these new sound stages have been built, and it makes it so we can get projects that we could never get in the past. Now we have Marvel. Marvel did Ant-Man here. Marvel then just did Captain America 3. Now they're on Guardians in the Galaxy. We could not have accommodated a show that size before Pinewood was here. More companies. Over 100 new companies have moved here or expanded here since the tax credit. Tyler Perry Studios has just taken over Fort McPherson. They're going to be moving here. Panavision Cameras, which closed their doors in 1998, was one of the first companies that came back. But you see, it's varied. There are catering companies, there are interactive companies, trucking companies, all kinds of companies to cater to the industry. And none of these companies get the tax credit. Only the productions get the tax credit. These people are here because of the level of business. This is what we talked about. 5,455 Georgia vendors were paid in 2013 with $623 million spent. And that is, you know, the MPAA companies, that only accounts for 6 major studios. There's a lot of projects that take place that are not MPAA companies. So that's a lot of money spent with a lot of different companies in Georgia. Workforce and talent. The MPAA also estimates that Georgia has 79,100 jobs. These are direct or indirect jobs in the state of Georgia. And these are jobs with an average salary of $84,000. So great salary jobs. The problem that we've run into recently is just because we've gotten so big and so fast that we don't have enough crew base. So the governor has put together a thing called the High Demand Career Initiative. The first one, industry specific, was for the film industry last June 1st. And we, as a result, the Georgia Film Academy, which is a partnership between the University System of Georgia and the Technical College System, has been created. They've named an executive director. They're staffing up now. They're going to start at Pinewood doing classes there, but the great thing about this is it's not replicating the classes that are already at the university system or the technical college system. These are fast-paced, certificate-based classes, and they can move throughout the state. You know, we want to go where people are interested, where the needs are, so it's not going to be tied to any real estate. It's going to be, you know, fast-paced, get somebody in, teach them the skills, and get them out there working. One of the things that we have concentrated on this last couple of years, or these last couple of years, is film tourism, because we've always talked about the production value, but we know the projects are coming now. We're kind of happy with the number of projects we're getting, but we also know that there's a huge film tourism element out there that we're, you know, we want to support and try to quantify. You know, for years, Dukes of Hazzard has been a huge tourism draw for Newton County, which is Covington, Georgia. And they only shot 5 episodes here in 1979, but it spawned an industry that just won't die. We've seen the same thing with a lot of the other projects that shoot in Georgia. Atlanta Film Tours, Savannah Movie Tours, Mystic Falls Tours. All of these are companies that run daily tours to towns and take people, you know, that come, national, international visitors come from all over the world to come to these towns to see where these shows were shot. This is the town of Sonoy. Anybody know what Sonoy is famous for now? Walking Dead. Walking Dead. So this is a picture in the top left-hand corner of what Sonoy looked like before. And if you look at the top right corner, that's what it looks like now. They had 6 storefronts. It was a very quiet little town. And now they have 51. They're building another wing right behind on the right of this, and 40% of that new street has already been pre-leased. And a lot of that has to do with the energy that's created by the fact that The Walking Dead is down there. This is their town of Woodbury. So we did start a new website. It's called Come Tour Georgia. And what it is a way to engage people, to try to get people to come to Georgia, to take these tours. It's film, music. We have behind-the-scenes videos. We do contests all the time. We get props from the shows, and we do contests. So it's a great way to drive traffic to Georgia and then drive them to explore Georgia so that we get more tourism out of it. Another thing that we've done that we've thought was very successful is something called a Camera Ready Community Program. Our office has just recently expanded from 4 people to 5 people. So there's not a lot of people handling all this business. So what we've done is for all the 159 counties in Georgia, we have found a designee in each county to be our camera ready person. And what that means for us is those people can help us better identify locations in their area. You know, if we find something that we don't have in our files, or if we want to make sure that the pictures that we have in our files are still accurate and, you know, the place hasn't burned down or turned into something else, we'll shoot it out to our camera ready communities and say, do you all have anything in your area that matches this? And those people can upload photos, and so then they're in the mix of potential sites for the movies that are coming in. So it's been a great program. It's a great support to our office, And so it keeps the communities engaged. Here are some of the resources that we have. We kind of have two things going on at once. We have the website, the official website, through Georgia.org, and that's really for producers that want to find out about the tax incentives and that kind of thing. And then the Come Toward Georgia is for the fan base. So we kind of got two plates spinning with that. We also have Facebook, where we put up casting calls and extras, and if you want to list your location for movies and that kind of thing. So that's kind of what we do here. Any questions? Do I have you want me to show a video? Sure.
Sure. Yeah.
Is there sound? I'll try it.
While she's getting ready, I think that's you, darling.
Yeah, it is. I just
Representative Taylor.
wanted to add a couple comments, and
Yes.
thank you. I'm from Thomasville, and we may be seeing you next week. We have expanded and grown on this. We have our own Covey Film Festival, and it's next week, where we have the movie industry showing up, and it was something unique to Thomasville. I don't know of anybody else doing it, but we appreciate all your help in making this happen, and it's a busy week for us. I'm not sure how many films. We're showing like a dozen films during the course of the week, and thank you for your support of that.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I came down there recently with Amy Carter and did a 3-day tour, and it was great.
Chairman Stevens and I attended Goosebumps, which was filmed in Madison, Georgia, and I said, I don't want to go see that. It was fantastic. It was fantastic. Y'all need to go and see that, and that was a big plus for Madison, Georgia, there, and for the state of Georgia. It's and we should have gotten you, Senator Mullis, to go with us on that 3D. It was great.
Okay, great.
No, they jumped right out at you, and it was those things was
Senator Mullin,
good.
you want the clip reels, right? Okay.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, Senator Beasley would like to ask you a question.
Lee, I'd like to ask a question on Sonoya. How was the investment to upgrade the storefronts?
How was the investment done?
Right.
Well, it was lucky because the guy that owns Raleigh Studios, Riverwood, it was formerly Riverwood Studios, and it sat quiet for a long time. But he owns the place where they decided to locate the show, Walking Dead. So he had always wanted to make the town of Sonoy a backdrop, and because it was so quiet, he was able to go in there and buy up a bunch of storefronts. So it's kind of like he was getting paid over here and he got to spend it over here, which was great. So he did a great rehab. He built a lot of new, I don't know, you can't see the pictures now, but those pictures, it ended there, but now it's quite a bit bigger, but they did them so that it looked like all of them were historic buildings. So they really did a great job.
Thank you very much.
Country and Western, is Zach Brown band?
Yeah, Zach Brown has a
restaurant there.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
No, it's not. It's not a. It is not a backdrop town, but he set it up to be one. And then, if you're a fan of The Walking Dead, you'll know that there is a town built there, Alexandria, Virginia, which is actually in Sonoy too. And they built a big wall around this town, and there are 6 families living inside there that will be inside the set of The Walking Dead for the next few years. So that was a little thing in there. He built the houses inside there and then sold them to them, and they probably should have had a lawyer read that a little more carefully, but they're in there now. All right, I'm going to show you this little video here.
Okay.
We can get it up here. I don't think we do have sound.
Did he not connect? He may not have connected it from that laptop.
Okay.
Then.
Yeah, we.
If you like, we could send this to everybody to view.
Okay,
Or
let me
if
just make sure. Yeah, we're.
it didn't have sound connected to it.
No. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we have no sound here.
Hold on a second.
Ah.
You're gonna have it from right there, but that's it.
Let's do this then. Start it over. Where's this How about that?
Goodness, what were you thinking?
We're gonna MacGyver it a little bit. Start over.
Please just help us get through this.
Where's this
Hello. My name's Forrest Gump.
What were you thinking?
Please, just help me get through this trip. Please, just help us get through this.
We have never seen anything like this. And we will never see anything like it again.
Atlanta Center, this is Southjet 227. We're in an uncontrolled dive descending out of 21,000 feet.
We lost the left engine.
Let it roll.
Are we gliding?
This is nice.
I have allotted us each $8 per meal. The tomato soup for me, please.
I'm going to take this glass of baby bags.
This is from the buffet, and it is on the house. Enjoy your soup.
I hate to tell you this, but you're going the wrong way on a one-way street.
To the store, ma'am, like you said.
Well, why didn't you turn on Highland Avenue?
Big Wiggly ain't on Highland
I know
Avenue.
where it is, and I
right
want to go the way I always go on Highland Avenue.
Yonder the Big Wiggly. See?
Get ready to turn.
Yeah.
When Tallahassee goes Hulk on a zombie, he sets the standard. No fear. It's like art.
You got a purty mouth.
I say half. Which half do you want? You want this half? You want this half?
It is.
And if you hit any rocks, don't hit him with your head.
Wow.
They could have shot you in the heart and the head, but they didn't. I made peace with my sin. It's over.
Establish trust and drop the hammer.
Look at that adventure. I love that. Welcome to Savannah.
I'm Ron Burgundy. The best thing I ever did was install this deep fryer in the Bago.
Ron, why do you have this bag of bowling balls in this terrarium filled with scorpions?
Muskrat, muskrat, candlelight, doing the town.
One day, out of blue, clear sky, I got a letter from Jenny, wondering if I could come down to Savannah and see her, and that's what I'm doing here. Down that way?
Down that way.
It was nice talking to you.
Just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. I say just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind.
That's better, isn't it?
So much. And you know, this is very dangerous what we did this morning, because Alabama is looking.
Chairman, I've been making a lot of notes, and thank you. We do have a small film initiative in our state. It's kind of all of our tax money on sales tax goes to education, and when you start doing anything that might deviate from that, it becomes quite difficult. But we do have a small incentive. We are trying to copy some of you because you've done so successful. So I know the whole state is proud, and congratulations on what you do. We see you and we are envious for you, but we're certainly not going to be a large competitor because we don't have the resources you have. But you've done a great job.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, our legislature really got it right, and we've been the beneficiary of it. So. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lee. You're doing a great job, and we look forward to working with you this coming year. Thank you so much. I'm going to call on our co-chair once again to introduce our next guest speaker, Senator Harbison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next presenter is Thomas Worthy. Thomas is currently the Director of Governmental Affairs for the State Bar of Georgia and serves as the co-chairman of the Georgia Council on Criminal Justice Reform. He previously served as a legislative assistant to Congressman Charlie Norwood and as a policy advisor and deputy counsel to Governor Nathan Deal. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. I appreciate the time to speak with you a little bit about Georgia's justice reform and reinvestment initiatives. I went to undergrad and law school up in Virginia. However, I am originally from Carrollton, so I'm right there as half Georgian, half Alabamian. So I'm happy to have our neighbors to the west join us today. I really appreciate the opportunity to present very briefly to you guys about what Georgia's been doing over the past 4 years, and then I certainly want to leave some time for questions. But when Governor Deal took office in 2010, the Pew Charitable Trust had just completed a report, and it was called the 1 in 30 report. And Pew surveyed the nation and recognized that 1 in 30 adults were in some sort of correctional control, meaning incarceration, probation, or parole. They looked at Georgia, and we had a 1 in 13, which is a staggering number. Now, the Pew report did not necessarily get it completely correct because they were counting cases and not counting individuals. However, the moral of the story of a staggering, disproportionate sentencing in Georgia certainly resonated. So the governor, upon his election, started the Special Counsel of Criminal Justice Reform, and I want to say at the outset, I think its success is based on the thoughtfulness that he put in to appointing the members. The Special Counsel of Criminal Justice Reform had legislators, judges, criminal defense lawyers, prosecutors, members of the community. It was geographically diverse, racially diverse, politically diverse, and it was diverse on all different practices and areas of administration of justice. And so their first report that they issued in 2011, they said that if Georgia did nothing, as Georgia continued to grow, our prison population would grow, and it would cost us $264 million by 2018. Moreover, the Department of Corrections at that time was operating at about 103% capacity, and they said if we did nothing, that would jump from 107 to 19 and maybe even 112, 112% capacity. So the council went to work, formulated consensus-based recommendations by a data-driven discussion. And they made recommendations to the General Assembly in 2012 in the form of HB 1176, and it was the first meaningful sentencing reform that the state of Georgia has passed in 35 years, and it passed nearly unanimously. The governor was so excited about that success that he requested that the council look at what he referred to as the second leg of the stool. And the second leg of the stool was updating our juvenile code and really doing meaningful juvenile justice reform. That bill was introduced in 2013. That bill passed the General Assembly unanimously. And then the governor asked our council the next year to look at what he referred to as the third leg of the stool, which candidly is the hardest part, and that is reentry and providing wraparound services to the offenders reentering society. That is the hardest part because that is something that the government alone cannot do. So we had to really engage with, and that's not something that you can legislate completely. We found some areas of the law that needed to be tweaked, but we knew that we had to engage the faith-based communities. We knew that we had to engage civic clubs. We knew that we had to engage people around the state and go on a massive public education campaign. And we did so, and that bill, SB 365, the reentry bill, passed the General Assembly unanimously in 2014. And those are the three major meaningful changes that have taken place. The council is still very much in existence. We still work throughout the summer and the fall, deliver the legislature, the governor, and the Chief Justice a report every January. That usually takes the form of a criminal justice reform bill, but the vast majority of our responsibilities right now are providing an oversight and implementation piece, because implementing the reforms and giving the General Assembly the data and the resources that they need to tweak the reforms are now the most important part. And that's just kind of the nuts and bolts of what we've done. One of the reasons we've been so successful is that, you know, just like Alabama, we Georgians have a streak of independence and like doing things our own way. And so we did not take too kindly to people coming down and saying, well, Texas did this and you need to do this, or California did this and you need to do this. We took Georgia data, had a Georgia data discussion, and made Georgia reforms. So I think it does not behoove me or our council to speak to the Alabama legislators and say this is what you need to do. However, I do want to talk about the three imperatives that I think is driving our council. It's certainly driving the governor, and I would think is driving the members of the Georgia General Assembly. First of all, that's the moral imperative. The governor has spoken about this in many speeches, and kind of the buzz line is you have to figure out who you're mad at and who you're scared of. And the people that you're mad at, you need to give them diversionary options. You need to give them treatment for mental illness and substance abuse. And you need to reserve those hard prison beds that are a finite resource for the people that we're scared of. That's the most important thing. That's the moral imperative. The public safety imperative is equally important. The public recidivism is the buzzword that we talk about in our council and talk about among all the correctional national thought leaders. And that the definition of recidivism is a reconviction within 3 years of release. But distilling it down for a West Georgia boy, that really means a new crime and a new victim. And that means less safe communities. So there's a huge public safety imperative here that is equally as important as the moral imperative. 95% of all people sentenced to the Georgia Department of Corrections are going to get out at some point in time. Do we want someone that is so dangerous inside the facility that they are escorted by our CERT teams to max out and have a CERT team escort them to a fence and a gate and say, here's $20 in a bus ticket, good luck? Do you want that individual released to society, or do you want an individual released to society that has a commitment from their community and from their state of wraparound services, helping them try to get jobs, helping them try to get employment, or jobs and employment, same thing, helping them trying to get housing, helping them trying to get back on their feet? Do you want that individual in your community, or do you want the former? And I would submit to you, you certainly want the latter. And then the last thing is the fiscal incentive, or the fiscal imperative. You know, I don't think that the fiscal imperative is important as the public safety and the moral imperative. But candidly, I think the fiscal imperative is the reason why we're all talking about this right now. When I came into the governor's office in 2011, I opened my desk and there was an amazing report done by Governor Perdue in his first year of his first term called the GRIP report. And some of you folks that have been around here for a while probably remember the GRIP report. It was great analysis of strong data, but the political will was not quite there yet. 13, 14 years ago. I think that the recession and I think that the fiscal imperative certainly brought everybody to the table. And it allowed us to have these candid, transparent, and meaningful conversations about an issue that is not always politically easy. Some takeaways that we found from our process, data. If you try to make reforms to your correctional policies or your sentencing policies based on anecdotal evidence, you're never going to get it right. You have to look at the data systems, you have to look at your system drivers, and you have to respond accordingly. Second of all, implementation is key. We have a citizen legislature that all have real jobs back in their home communities. They pass these meaningful bills. Somebody's got to still be there to look at it so that they have the right information when they come back in January. Implementation is equally important as legislating. And then lastly, don't be afraid to have the conversation. The Georgia Council on Criminal Justice Reform has absolutely no power, doesn't even have a budget, doesn't have any real authority, doesn't have any oversight. We're just people volunteering our times on behalf of the governor. But the one currency that we do have, I believe, and my Georgia colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, is that we have a trust and and goodwill with the legislature. They know that when we give them our report, it is going to be thoroughly vetted. There are not going to be any surprises in it. It is going to be consensus-based, and everybody kind of on all sides of the spectrum will have reached agreement before it comes to the legislature. And then the last tidbit I want to leave you with is the most important one, is that this is not going to get you beat. People around the country are having these conversations and passing these laws. And, after the first major bill, HB 1176, we in the governor's office watched every single primary on both sides of the aisle. We wanted to see if our Republican colleagues that were being primaried were going to be hit in their primary as a soft on crime discussion. We wanted to see if our Democratic colleagues were going to be hit in primaries for working with Republicans on an issue. Of all the primaries that took place in the 2012 election cycle, criminal justice reform came up one time, and it was a Republican member who was being primaried by someone to the right of him, and it's hard to get to the right of the individual I'm talking about, and his opponent said, well, he's just going to take too much credit for this good work. That is the only time it came up in the entire primary season. And so I think that that's the most important thing, that it is meaningful. We owe it to our citizens. It can be successful, and it no longer is a political lightning rod. So that's kind of the summary from Georgia's perspective, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thomas, we appreciate you coming. And this, Georgia was going through a horrible situation. We were number 5 or 4 in prisons, prisoners being locked up in the state of Georgia, and we were putting out nearly $1 billion in regard to our expenses every year, and it was going up. And we needed to build more prisons, so this has been phenomenal. We had a governor that's, we stopped talking about it and did something about it, and we just owe y'all a real great.
I agree, Mr. Chairman. I think the governor deserves a lot of credit, and I think that the General Assembly does too. I mean, the General Assembly have worked tirelessly on this. It is one thing that we can all coalesce behind and agree with, and I think that it's been very exciting. I co-chair this council with Judge Michael Boggs of the Court of Appeals. And now we are oftentimes being invited to Kentucky and to Texas and to California and to Virginia to talk about these efforts and talk about these reforms. And Georgia has really become a national thought leader in this. I'm waiting to be invited to Hawaii to talk about reforms, but they have not yet. They have not yet sent me an invitation.
Who's 26?
That's
Dexter.
Yeah. And first of all, I thank you for what you do in just observing your council. It's just like most around the country. Not funded, not taken care of. And it's like the situation we're in, we're trying to take care of the problem with the upside down for them funnel all of the resources are at the bottom, and it's too late once we get into the situation with the prison situation. But I have a couple questions that just wanted to see how Georgia was taking care of these problems, and I see it's going, for most states, it's rearing its head now, and I think Pew even did some research on it also. I guess 3 decades ago, the idea of 3 strikes you're out, I don't know if Georgia has that same legislation here.
Yes, we do.
Was a good idea, I guess, up front, but now, 3 decades later, we have an aging population in our prison systems that are there, in my opinion, taking up bed space. You get people that's 65, 70 years old in that area. That's pretty much where some of them are now. And we have a large population that are there just being taken care of by the state for health reasons, different things that, in my opinion, are not the type that you're going to have to release with that CERT team. Right. Instead, you're going to have to roll them in a wheelchair back to their local neighborhoods. That's one question. If y'all address that, or how you going? Also, the disproportionate minority confinement that is, I guess, is out there, but we're really not, addressing that issue. And I know it's a problem in most states that you take a look at and see what type of research y'all have done on that, or what the state of Georgia is doing about the disproportionate minority confinement issue.
I'll start with the first question. The first question is one of the main reasons I do think that we continue to be trusted by the General Assembly and have goodwill with the General Assembly is because we reach consensus before it comes. So when we bring our report over here in January, they're not going to get hit in the hallway by the prosecutors and say, this is horrible, or they're not going to be hit in the hallway by the sheriffs and say, this is horrible. We reach consensus. And so, having a sheriff and a prosecutor on our council, just like we have a criminal defense lawyer and a public defender on our council, we have not been able to completely roll back mandatory minimums or completely roll back the 3 strikes you're out policy, and I don't know if we will. That's something that is an ongoing conversation. But this is kind of a West Georgia saying, there's more than one way to skin a cat. And one of the things that we recommended last year and the General Assembly passed and the governor signed was expanding parole eligibility for nonviolent recidivists. So for the individuals that are in, and this was actually modeled after some of the good work that Louisiana did, for the individuals that are incarcerated on a recidivist sentence, meaning having been convicted 3 times for something, if they were nonviolent, if they were, and then the requirements are quite onerous. If they are nonviolent, if they've availed themselves to every educational and counseling opportunity while they're in prison, if they've gone 2 calendar years without any DRs with the Department of Corrections, they are now eligible for parole. Now, it's still up to our parole board to parole them, and that is their constitutional right, and that's how, and that's a 5-person vote, and so they got to get 3 votes on the parole board. But now these individuals that have been there for 3 strikes you're out, and really what we know are a victim of history, frankly, because now with drug courts and diversionary tactics and stuff like that, you're probably not going to get 3 strikes. You're probably going to, if you do everything right, you're going to get your substance abuse problem kicked in a drug court setting. So these individuals that are victims of history now have parole eligibility. So that's how we've handled it now. Now there's ongoing conversations about, I think I speak for everyone when I can say that just being an armchair political scientist here in Georgia, I don't think that mandatory minimums for any of the 7 deadlies will be discussed. But I think there are ongoing conversations about mandatory minimums for some of the less violent and serious crimes. And I think that there's ongoing discussion about retweaking those the 3 strikes you're out policy. But right now, at least they now have a hope, and the parole board actually has already released. The law took effect July 1 of this year, and the parole board have already released about 7 people to date under that new law, and it's really a pretty powerful thing. Judge Boggs and I went and visited with the first 2, one in Macon and one up in Dalton, and it was very powerful. The second one about disproportionate sentences of African Americans, that is a huge problem. And what's exciting about this council is we're talking about it, and we're not worried about it. And with the reforms that we're not worried about having the conversation, is what I meant to say. And with the reforms that we with the reforms that we have recommended to the General Assembly and the General Assembly has passed, we are seeing that needle move. In fact, approximately 3 or 4 weeks before Governor Deal's re-election, the front page article above the fold of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution was that African American commitments to prison is down in this state by 20% and is at the lowest level since the mid-'80s. So it's having the conversation and not running from that is very important. But also when you implement these reforms, because African Americans are disproportionately sentenced to prison, they are also the largest group of people that can avail themselves of the reforms. And so we're seeing that needle move, and we're very, very excited about that.
Who's 28?
That
Bob.
would be me.
Okay, Bob.
Thank you, Representative Green. My district is right across from Carrollton, Georgia.
Heflin and Ranburn?
Heflin and Ranburn, Woodland.
Is the Bulldog still open?
The Bulldog has closed.
Oh, that is.
But many of my
I got in little trouble at the Bulldog.
Many of my constituents work in Carrollton at Southwire and other places. Just a couple of things. First of all, if we in Alabama had overcrowding that came to 112%, we'd think we were in Eden right now. And we've gone through some judicial reform recently, but we've had tremendous overcrowding in our prisons. I was interested in your juvenile justice bill. Was that in 2013? You said that it passed.
Yes, sir.
Could you give me just a few key points of what
Sure.
you did with the juvenile justice?
Yes, sir. It was HB 242, and I know Brad and Senate Research can get you the white sheets in the text of the bill. But before the reforms, our juvenile justice system had designated felonies that had carried with it mandatory detention. But we looked at it in this list, and you could tell where the lobbyists came in throughout the history, because all of a sudden you looked at this list and smash and grab burglary was on the same list as murder. And so you can look at that and say, well, the Retail Association was very effective in the 90s. And so one of the big reforms that we did was we bifurcated that list, and we have a designated felony A list and designated felony B list. All of them still carry a mandatory detention, but the DFs on the B list are a much less severe detention in a YDC than on the A list. There is no reason why, breaking and entering of an unoccupied dwelling and smash and grab burglary needs to be on the same list as murder and rape. So we split that list. That was number one. Number two, we ramped up what we're calling local community incentive grants. And those are grants that the state administers through the CJCC, and it gives communities new state appropriations every year to provide in their community evidence-based, validated treatment options, and they get that money on a loose contract with the state to reduce their commitments by 30% to detention. And then lastly, we said, we recommended, and the legislature said, that you could no longer send someone to a YDC without going in front of a judge on issues such as, we called them, I can't even remember the name of the issues, but issues that would not be illegal but for their age: smoking, truancy, stuff like that. We said, there are some times where that indicates that there's some criminal behavior, but you're going to have to bring that person in front of a juvenile court judge, and they're going to have to examine the full file about what's going on, and the sheriff doesn't just get to take them to the RYDC and lock them up. So we're seeing great success with the community incentive grants. That is a big part of the reinvestment part of this. I mean, 4 years ago we were talking about criminal justice reform. Now we're talking about criminal justice reform and reinvestment, and putting those resources back into our communities are the most important part.
Senator Mullis.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas, for all your work on
Thank you,
criminal
Mr.
justice.
Chairman.
When do we get Representative J. Neal back?
Back in the legislature?
No, I'm kidding.
Oh, well, it was actually his primary that I was referring to. His opponent said that
right?
J. Neal was going to take too much credit for it. Yeah.
Isn't that funny? How much have we reduced the population in our prisons because of this reform?
We peaked, our prison population peaked at about 57,000 inmates, and the Department of Corrections census, they come out on Fridays. The Department of Corrections census last Friday was about 48,000, so it's a reduction of about 9,000 offenders. And one of the other things, kind of words of wisdom that we've learned is this takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years to really show the results. And so I think we lose credibility with the legislature if I stand here and say we're taking credit for all of this. We're very cautious not to prematurely claim success. However, you want to see the numbers go in the right direction, and Mr. Chairman, they are.
Well, do you have any data on the recidivism for those 9,000 people?
No, because recidivism by definition is a 3-year look back. However, the recidivism rate, we can now claim the recidivism rate at least after the first 1176. That's now been 3 years, and the recidivism rate is continuing to drop. I think we've gone from 30% and some change down to closer to 25%.
Terrific. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. To our Alabama friends, this has reduced the number of prisoners in our local jail, a tax-saving measure to our local folks. It is phenomenal. We had a 3,000 backlog when we started this, and we're down to maybe 100 today.
The state of Georgia would have state sentence inmates being housed in county jails, and we would have to pay local sheriffs a subsidy for that. In 2011, the state appropriated $25 million for local jail subsidies. Last year, the state spent $40,000.
It's a big change.
With the subsidies, it still wasn't enough to compensate for those prisoners that were housed in local jails.
Right. So that's why the sheriffs, who normally wouldn't be talking about criminal justice reform, that's why the sheriffs are extremely excited to have this conversation.
And Senator Freddie Powell Sims and myself, we're seeing the Juvenile Justice Reform Act helping our district with a new facility that they're building, and hopefully it will open this next year down there. John.
Yes,
excuse me, Representative.
for your work. I have an observation more than a question.
Yes, sir.
Just this past month, I've been involved all of a sudden with the Walker County faith-based prison, and I found it to be very informative, helpful, and Warden Lee down there has expressed the fact that the guards and all are so much in favor of it as well, because they're not having the conflict with the officials nor the with the convicts, if you will, and so it seems to be a win-win.
Yes, sir.
Of course, it's fairly new. I guess there's 3 faith-based
yes, sir.
in the state now.
Two male and 1 female. Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's I don't know where the other 2 are, but this is Walker County up
yes,
in the northwest corner.
Yes, sir. We are gathering data on that. We are seeing great success in what we're attempting to do, especially and this ties into a lot of different issues. This ties into judicial data exchange and trying to get our court technologies out of the dark ages. You know, that's Alabama is very fortunate in that. I learned how to practice law in Birmingham. I practiced law for 2 years in Birmingham, and what you have on e-filing and the judicial data exchange is far better than what Georgia has. So we're trying to track those numbers and do that data exchange so that we can see the successes. And you know, Representative, another thing that you bring up that's very, very important is if we're doing our job right on criminal justice reform and reinvestment, the lower level nonviolent offenders are staying in the community and the more dangerous people are going to prison. So I think that it's also important, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that criminal justice reform in a way can make corrections job a lot harder, because we're sending the hardened, dangerous, violent people behind the wire and keeping those nonviolent, low-risk folks in the community. And that, I think, is where the faith-based stuff comes into play a great deal, because if we can reduce the violence in prisons, even though we're sending more violent people to them, that is of vital importance, and we're waiting on the data to show, but we certainly hear great anecdotal evidence about the successes of those faith-based efforts.
Yeah, there were some people in there that were not going to be getting out,
right,
but they were still part of this faith-based program, so they didn't have the negative effect of a lot of prisons, that they were more positive. But also, along with that, is that there's several training courses, and one was a welding school that I think they just had at first graduation.
Yeah, they just did the first graduation.
First graduation. I wasn't able to attend that, but that.
And vocational training is key. We're looking at commercial driver's licenses, CDL training. I mean, if you're a welder and you're good at your trade, you can make more money than all of us in this room together. And when you talk about having a good job that gives you money to incentivize you not to go back and return to the life of crime, you know, welding is a great example.
It is, and it seemed to be, in talking with some of the inmates, they seemed to be much happier. They said that little things like, no one's stealing anything from me anymore. No one's trying to start a fight with me. And all of those make the guarding, the processing much easier. But thank you for doing that.
Thank you, sir.
You did also make comment that the mandatory sentencing is still in effect. When can some of that be changed? Because
we're examining that right now. The council is currently working in the big ticket items this year, and this is kind of my first conversation with Georgia representatives and senators. But what you can expect to see in our report this year is a re-examination of the First Offender Act, and and really restoring the intent of that, and how to, in a technological age, how to seal and the records and when to appropriately do it, and then also a continued conversation about looking at the recidivist sentencing statutes, the 3 strikes you're out. I think mandatory minimums will continue to be a conversation, but we know that that's got to be consensus-based and really locked up tight before it comes to the General Assembly, and I think that will probably be next year.
Well, I was going to continue that statement in that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That either we can have the standard, the required sentencing, and we can reduce the judges we have in the state, because they don't have a choice to judge.
Right.
So
careful, you're getting to meddling now.
Right. and
I hope so.
In the criminal justice reform stuff is a volunteer basis. The person who signs my paychecks are the lawyers and the judges. So I'm going to withhold comment on that, Representative.
We have time for one more question here, and we're going to turn to our friend from Alabama.
Thank you, Representative Green. You mentioned earlier drug courts and diversionary programs. Do you guys have a drug court in every county in Georgia?
Well, we're about to.
Okay.
And the reason why I said that is last year a very, very hotly debated topic was judicial compensation. The appellate court judges in this state hadn't had a pay raise in 20 years. The Superior Court judges in the state hadn't had a pay raise in 16 years. They're deserving of pay raises, but after a recession, so are teachers, so are everyone else. And it's hard to tell a teacher why someone that generally is already making six figures need a pay raise. And us in this room, as we're talking about policy, we understand that you want to be able to recruit bright lawyers to be your judges, and you have to. There's a compelling public policy argument about adequate compensation of judges. However, when you go home to your constituents, that's a lot harder to make. It's a lot easier for us to talk about the public policy here, and I understand that. But anyway, the compensation bill last year did make it out. Everybody got a little bit of a pay raise, and the Superior Court judges got half of what they were asking for, but then the legislature in their infinite wisdom sweetened the pot that said if you operate an accountability court, you get a $6,000 a year annual stipend.
Perfect.
And so I think we're going to see a lot more accountability courts in the state.
Well, I happen to be involved in one in Chambers County over in Alabama, and we were instrumental in starting that in 2008. And I think for any criminal justice reform, that is an integral part of the puzzle.
Absolutely.
We have, since 2008, a 3% recidivism rate. So out of all those who either graduate or who terminate and go to jail.
Oh, you mean for the court?
Yes.
Not for statewide. I was about to say, you ought to be up here talking
no.
if Alabama has a 3% recidivism.
No, this is Chambers County.
Yeah, okay.
This is my home county.
Gotcha.
But for all those who have either graduated or who have not graduated and gone to jail, only 3% have reoffended. And so I think that's very important. We're keeping people out of the county jail on misdemeanors and some felonies. We're keeping them out of DOC on the felony charges. And when they graduate with a job, a GED if they don't have one, a driver's license, and they're ready. You also mentioned reentry. They're ready to move right back into society as productive citizens. So I think that's a very important part of the puzzle, like
Absolutely.
I said earlier. So
I would encourage everyone, Georgia and Alabama alike, if you've never participated in a accountability court graduation, please do. It's very moving. I think one of the impetus behind the governor getting involved in this, not only some of the reports that came out when he was elected, but his son's been a Superior Court judge for almost 15 years now, and started the second drug court in the state, and is a leader and a visionary on this up in Hall County. And when our governor was a congressman, and when our governor, as governor, he goes and speaks to as many graduations, almost every single one of them in his son's drug court. It's very, very moving. And having been involved in this intimately for 5 years now, it's also very, very hard. This is not soft on crime. This is strategically smart on crime. And I have seen people in arraignment calendars stand up and say, I'd prefer just to go to prison because accountability, the accountability court's too hard. And so Governor Deal's been a prosecutor, a criminal defense attorney, a juvenile court judge, and a congressman. So,
and a senator, state
and
senator.
a senator. How did I forget that?
We are just delighted to have you today, and,
Thank you, Mr.
you
Chairman.
did an
Thank you
excellent
for
job explaining this to us. And we got one more.
That was just me. I was going to offer a quick comment.
Okay.
And first of all, thank you to Thomas. Thomas
Thank
is a
you,
terrific friend to the committees that I staff through the year, the Judiciary and Public Safety Committees. Two, as he alluded to, our office prepares summaries of all of these bills, as well as the reports that their commission has put together. So if you all need any of that information, feel free to email me at your convenience, and I'll get that to you.
Thank you, Brad. And thank you for coming and being with us. And I know that once again, they'll take something back across the Chattahoochee there. Right. And we appreciate this very much. You'll probably be a speaker over there pretty soon.
We would encourage you to work closely with us on this so that we can make a difference for our citizens. But leave our movie stuff alone. Don't pretend like you didn't see that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Who's gonna? All three here. Okay, so we're gonna call on. We're gonna let Michael start. Is Michael gonna do it? Okay. We'll get Michael Sullivan. If you want to stand and stretch a little bit, this is our last phase here, and it's on the transportation portion here. Yeah, we're going to do Michael. So if you'll do Michael. Oh, my. Oh, we got them all. Okay. Good morning. Michael, welcome.
Good morning.
We're delighted to have you this morning. Seth, we're delighted to have you. And Zach's going to be your backup back there. We're always delighted to have him. And we're on the last phase before they leave and head back to Alabama. So they are very interested in what you have to say here this morning in regard to what we did on the transportation there. So Senator Harbison, if you'll introduce Michael there.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael Sullivan is currently the president and CEO of the American Council of Engineering Companies of Georgia. He was previously a partner with the law firm of Anderson, Tate, and Carr, where he headed the firm's government relations, land use, and zoning practices. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thank you so much. I was just talking to somebody this morning. They were dealing with a local city here in Georgia. They had a zoning meeting last night. You just reminded me of the story, and she's dealing with the fact that one of the council members hit one of the citizens at the council meeting. So y'all have sometimes a much easier job. The legislature very rarely results in fisticuffs. One of my former partners was a state senator. He always said local government was a great way to begin and end a political career. But it's a pleasure to be with y'all here this morning, and we're not going to talk about football today, I hope. If we can all stipulate that, that'd be great. Good. Well, we accomplished a great thing last year here in Georgia. We passed, for the first time, a bill creating almost $1 billion a year in sustainable annual funding in addition to previous funding for transportation, roads, and bridges here in Georgia. That's our success, but I'd probably like to start by talking about our failures, because while we did succeed in 2015, it wasn't our first bite at the apple the first time we tried to get that done. We tried for several years here in Georgia to get additional transportation funding, and I think our failures in some ways are maybe as instructive as our success. One of the things about our failures was we didn't articulate what success was. We talked about, we need more funding. We don't have enough funding. Please, General Assembly, give us some funding. But we didn't really articulate what the specific need was. Therefore, we really didn't set the goal of what success would be. One of the things I think that was a key to our success in 2015 is we understood from the outset we needed to figure out what success was. So we created a study committee. The General Assembly created a joint study committee, the House Senate Study Committee on Critical Transportation Infrastructure Funding. And they met around the state, 8 meetings in pretty much every corner of Georgia. And they heard from citizens in those local jurisdictions about what their specific local needs were. But they also heard from the Department of Transportation, from consultants, from economists, from accountants about what Georgia's true transportation funding needs were. And so we arrived at a number that was basically $1.5 billion. That was the need. That was what success meant, $1.5 billion. And then the second thing that we did after we set what the target was we figured out, what, $1 billion is good, but $1 billion for 1 year doesn't solve the problem. It needed to be sustainable. It needed to be $1 billion that was going to be $1 billion for the foreseeable future. And then it also needed to be dedicated. It needed to be something that was not subject to the annual appropriations process, because again, one General Assembly might see the need and fund the need, but another General Assembly might have an economic scenario that didn't allow them to do that. And so that funding needed to be dedicated to transportation. Unfortunately, here in Georgia, we have a constitutional provision that says that motor fuel taxes are constitutionally dedicated to roads and bridges. So that became the path that was chosen. It was not a direct path, as great as our process was. We started out in the House with a bill that was pretty much just an excise tax on motor fuel that got to that goal. The Senate was not as willing to go as high on the excise tax amount as the House went, and wanted to find a more diverse portfolio of revenue sources, and so they came back with a different proposal. But where we ended up was a proposal that raised Georgia's motor fuel, took our existing motor fuel taxes, which were then a 7.5 cent per gallon excise tax on motor fuel, and a 4% sales tax on the price of motor fuel, combined those together and put them into a new excise tax that was a per gallon excise tax, 26 cents per gallon for motor fuel and 29 cents per gallon for diesel. And then in addition to that, raised revenue through some sources large and small. One thing that was a concern to a lot of legislators was that alternative fuel vehicles in Georgia not only weren't paying their share of road maintenance because they're not buying gas, so they weren't paying for motor fuel, therefore not funding the roads. They were actually getting fairly substantial tax credits from the state in addition to the ones that the federal government provided. So those tax credits were sunsetted, and they created a new license that would require personal alternative fuel vehicles to pay $200. Okay, sure. $200 per year. Commercial alternative fuel vehicles to pay $300 per year. And then in addition to that, there was some heavy truck fees based on weights, and in addition to that, a per night room charge for hotels, $5 per night room charge for hotels. And the total of all those things put together came up to just slightly shy of $1 billion per year. And it's also indexed. Initially, it's a dual index. One of the concerns about motor fuel is that at some point in time, we are probably not going to be buying motor fuel for our vehicles. Our vehicles are probably going to be fueled by other alternative means. And so one concern is that, motor fuel gets you where you need to get right now, but it may be a declining source of revenue over time. So one of the indices that is on there is CAFE standards, federal fuel efficiency standards. As the federal fuel efficiency standards go up, in other words, as my car drives further on fewer gallons of fuel, that index amount goes up on that excise tax. And then the other is inflation, the consumer price index. That was one of the challenges that we had in Georgia, and it's the challenge we still have at the federal government level, is that we set an excise amount per gallon, cents per gallon, that's worth a certain amount, like the 18.6 cent federal excise tax. It was worth 18.6 cents in 1993. That's worth about 11 cents per gallon now because of inflation. So those dual inflationary factors will help ensure that we don't get into a similar situation here in Georgia, at least in the short term, as fuel efficiency increases and as inflation goes up.
With you there is Seth Milliken, and he's the executive director of the Georgia Transportation Alliance, and we take pride in the fact that we raised him here at the General Assembly. and y'all
did a great job.
Well, I tell you, it was nice to see people out there that were professional, and he was certainly one of those individuals out there helping. Did you have a question, Senator?
I wanted to address. I wanted to ask you about your the indexing. Tell me how that's going to work. In other words, you're going to factor in the miles driven and the consumer price index, and will the fuel tax just increase automatically, or do you go through some kind of process? So you do that on a yearly basis?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
yearly basis, Department of Revenue.
So if certain stars align themselves next year, you can say a cent added. Is there a process in there where you would take off any tax?
There's go ahead.
It'll float. So there is a floor. The floor would be that 26 cents a gallon. So it may go up. We're thinking probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6% a year. So probably half a penny, something like that. But then obviously if it goes up a certain amount and then the economy contracts again, then it would go back down, but it won't go lower than what it was set at.
You've got a floor.
Yes, sir. That's right. So it won't go below what it was set at on July 1st when the act went into effect at 26 cents.
The original bill we've been working on, I co-chair the Joint Transportation Committee. We have a standing committee in Alabama of legislators that as a House and Senate members, and I co-chair that. And we worked on an index bill, but we had also included in our index a ceiling and a floor, so that a possibility down the road, if fuel happened to go back up to a certain point, we would actually take tax off. In other words, a true indexing rather than basically a floor index that you have. I like what you got better. Ours is a little easier to sell to the public. The fact that, hey, someday and we'd used a cap of 309, which was the 10-year average for the Southeast for regular gas was 309, and we said if it ever gets over 309, we'll begin to take 2 cents off. That was in our original bill, but we're probably going to take that out of the bill we're going to introduce in January.
No, there was a cap. Georgia's a little bit unique in that we allow local governments to put a sales tax on motor fuel that's not dedicated to transportation purposes. There's an argument that it's not subject to the constitutional provision that I mentioned that says motor fuel taxes are subject to, or dedicated roads and bridges. That is taxed at $3 per gallon. It's capped at $3.
But that's left to the local.
That's right. That's right. That's a
Did you do anything with that? Did you cap that? Or any way you did cap that?
Yes, sir, it's capped at $3.
Because we have local options too. You know, local government can put on whatever they deem necessary, and we don't have a cap on that now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The initial version of the bill actually was going to either take away the local tax on motor fuel or require it to be spent on transportation purposes. I'll just shortly explain that didn't go over real well with the local government, so that didn't last very long. They were good partners in the process.
We like your statewide meetings. We're putting together a plan to do that now and include ALDOT and bring in all those concerned where we can look at what the needs are, because we, like you, even though you're a lot larger us population-wise, we have about as many roads as you do. We just don't have as much traffic on them. I looked out this window this morning of the motel, and I understand now why I don't live in Atlanta.
As you're going through that process, Sully pointed out that we had meetings in 8 different places around the state, and to Senator Gooch and Jay Roberts, who's now over at DOT, he's no longer chairman of the House Transportation Committee anymore, but they set these meetings in locations so that nobody in the state of Georgia would ever be more than 2 hours away from any of these meetings. And then at the end of each meeting, there was an open mic session. So it could have been a gripe session. It could have been, hey, somebody's got this really neat idea. Or they've got a pet project they want to talk about. And there was I think it was probably 30 minutes or an hour after each meeting that anybody could come and talk. So that gave us the ability to say that nobody's not had the opportunity to provide input into that process. And the other thing that we did, working in conjunction with the leadership of that committee, we had a fair idea going into it where we wanted that process to end up. And then when we formed the study committee, we form our study committees here through resolutions in the House and the Senate. We actually designated certain business community people to actually serve as an official part of the committee. That was important to us because it gave us input into the process. It also gave our legislators some cover. So that if and when we did start talking about things like the motor fuel tax and things like that, that gave our legislators some cover so that they could, if they needed to point the finger at the business community, they could do that. And that was a very helpful part of the process for us as well.
The business community and the Cities and Counties Association were also members
of that committee. That's right.
I think the other value of the study committee, in addition to being open to public input around the state, having the opportunity for the legislators to be spoken to by folks and to get their thoughts, was it also created some momentum behind the process. It created the idea in the media and in the community that this was going to be an issue that was going to be at the forefront of the legislative session. So that expectation kind of created a tailwind, if you will, behind the process. I talked a little bit earlier. I want to take questions, but don't want to miss this point because I think this is kind of the other takeaway. Learning from our failures is how we got to success. So one of the things was, what we talked about, defining success and all that. The other thing was we didn't assume that anybody was going to be opposed, that they couldn't be a supporter. In the past, and this is something we're all a little guilty of in politics, we assume, oh, that's a such and such. He's got this opinion, he's an X, so they think Y. You know, in 2012, we had a bill, or 2010, we had a bill that created a series of statewide referenda here in Georgia in 2012. Those passed in 3 of the 12 regions, but it failed pretty miserably in most of the others, particularly here in Metro Atlanta, where you would think, based on your hotel view this morning, that people would have been really eager to fund transportation. But we had a lot of opposition, particularly from the Tea Party. We actually had opposition from left and right here in Georgia. I actually went to a forum in 2012 where I sat between the leader of one of the biggest Tea Party organizations who said that our plan in Metro Atlanta had too much transit, and on my left, literally and figuratively, was Neil Herring, who heads up the Sierra Club in Georgia, who said that it didn't have enough transit. And I was in the middle trying to figure out how they could both be correct. What we did, though, different in 2012, we didn't really try to work at the grassroots to try to change hearts and minds. What we did in 2014 and 2015 is, while we're having this high-level conversation with legislators and study committees and consultants, is we got out around the state and we met with Tea Party leaders across Georgia. We met with folks who we thought might have some concerns and might have some issues. And that wasn't always fun, and it was never short. I mean, I think the longest one was maybe 2.5 hours. It takes a long time to get somebody from, you know, their starting position of thinking that they're opposed to what you're trying to do to a place where they're willing to consider the possibility that they might not have been right when they started the meeting. But we had Tea Party folks speak in I think it was this room actually, in favor of the bill in the House. We had Tea Parties that had on their official websites statements of support in favor of the need, because we talked to them, we met with them, we didn't just assume. So one of the things I would say to you in Alabama, because y'all probably have some similar groups in Alabama, don't assume that somebody's going to be opposed and that there's no point in talking to them. Outreach and education is important. It's real important.
Senator.
Well, as I said last night at dinner, our best momentum is that you've passed a tax over here. We can talk about Georgia's giving us some air under our wings since you've stepped up. But I really I appreciate the job you've done. I understand very diligently how important it is to get out and get the grassroots, and that's what we're going to begin to do.
And there's some specific messaging that really resonates with those, particularly the Tea Party or the more conservative folks. One of the things that really resonated with them was that in Georgia we were so dependent on federal transportation funding. And federal transportation funding comes with certain strings and certain regulations. So projects take longer to get done and they cost more to build. The idea that by creating Georgia funding we could have less regulation was something that really resonated with folks here in Georgia, for example, just to give one example.
Senator Freddie Powell Sims.
We have several caucuses other than Senate and House caucuses. We have Black Caucus, Rural Caucus, Women's Caucus, and especially the Black Caucus asked about minority participation. That became the vote from most of us that are members of that caucus. The Rural Caucus, of course, we always feel left out. And sometimes we become very suspicious if we're not a part of the planning and the conversation. And we too ask for seats at the table. That's what happened in 2000 and what was it, 10 or 12? Yeah. 10, is that most of us felt left out. Sure. Because the driver was Metro Chamber and larger chambers, but no real activation from the rural communities in Georgia. So that's a real stickler for those of us that serve rural counties. I still have a dirt road. Any way I can get my road paid?
Talk to former Representative Jay Roberts about that. But one of the great things for local folks that really helped in this process was, in addition to increasing the overall state budget, one of the provisions we have is a component of that is called the MIG. It's the Local Maintenance and Improvement Grants that go directly to local governments, and it's based on not politics, not based on anything. It's based on population and lane miles, and that doubled as a result of the passage of this bill. Was really good for locals. I think it also helped that we had a chairman from Ocilla and a chairman from Lumpkin County that weren't from Metro Atlanta, that weren't seen as thinking about Metro Atlanta issues and problems. And certainly the conversations that we had with the Black caucuses of both the Senate and the House relative to the things that GDOT has started to undertake as far as the disparity study and the things that the board has done since the passage of the bill were also really, really important.
Michael and them make it sound like it was a very easy bill, but it changed from day to day, week to week, and it dominated the whole session. But the momentum was there, and they did not give up.
Well, and we passed that bill not by a slim margin, but by constitutional majorities in the House and the Senate. We could have passed a constitutional amendment with the votes that we had in the House and the Senate. And I agree. I still remember watching that vote in the Senate, and I couldn't believe some of the people that we got to support us that hours before were not. But it was that momentum, I think, that tailwind that we talked about. People knew that there was an expectation of the voters that the General Assembly was going to finally address this issue in this session, and it kind of had some momentum behind it. And
I think the need kept resonating with people, and they kept pounding. I know Seth's group made sure that the Alliance was out there working, and it was a tremendous job to put all these groups together. It's and so we commend y'all, and let's don't open it back up for even with the hotel motel votes.
Here, Mr. Chairman, here. I'll also say one thing that I think was a little bit different that I think might be instructive for y'all in Alabama as you use us as your stalking horse. In previous years, most of the conversation about transportation had been about my commute. How fast can I get from point A to point B? Or in the rural areas about kind of, economic development, our connectivity, and so on and so forth. This time around, I felt like more citizens, the public, John Q. public, understood that transportation wasn't just about your personal commute, that it was the circulatory system of our economy. Whatever you do, whether it's knowledge-based employees getting to your office or goods and services getting to the port, it's about economic development. And if y'all are going to say, hey, Georgia did their thing, if we don't do our thing, well, how are we going to get jobs to come to Alabama? That's a talking point that I think would probably resonate with a lot of these folks that would otherwise maybe be opposed. Good.
Are there any other questions? Michael? Well, we can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming. This was one of the things that they wanted to talk about when we were in Alabama, and we had an individual to step up to the plate to do it over there, and he did a good job there. Randy Nix took on that job over there, and but they wanted to hear more, and we wanted some experts. And
I'm sorry they weren't available.
Y'all did. And we really appreciate y'all coming this morning, and thank y'all so much for what you're still doing for the state of Georgia.
Appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Thank
Absolutely. Thank y'all so much. With that wraps up our last speakers. Do we have anything else for the study committee to take up today? We just want to thank our Alabama friends for coming over, and it's just so nice to see y'all in Georgia, and we hope you've had that opportunity to hear things and see things. And the next time we meet, we'll meet outside of Atlanta probably, and let you see some of God's country for sure. And on that, Senator Dial.
Let me, on behalf of all the committee, thank you and all your staff and all the people in the legislation. Thank the presentators, and it's just great to steal some knowledge from you to take back on because we're going to be facing this issue. This is one of the primary issues that'll be in our session coming up in January. So the knowledge that you've shared with us, and I'm going to get your contact information later on so that I might be able to. I might even have to enlist some of you to come to Alabama at some point and bail us out over there. But
happy to do it, and my colleague Renee Casilla, who from ACEC
Alabama,
right, already been talking. She's already been picking my brain.
Yeah. But Mr. Chairman and all the Georgia delegation, thank you for your hospitality. It's been great. I just think this is a great opportunity for us to continue to share and develop a rapport among each other, and just look forward to our next meeting. Any of Alabama delegation, thank you very much. Thank you.
Speaker Ralston sends his regards. He regrets that he could not be here to greet y'all personally, and he said next time in Georgia it'll be different. Good. All right.